Let's move on to another polarizing team. That's the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, their fans have been saying that they are Super Bowl contenders for the past, what is it now, 27 years. But this year they have one of their better teams. They have one of their best defenses in the past 15 to 20 years. Their offense, ever since Dak Prescott has come back, outside of their turnovers, has been good. They've only put up less than 27 points per game once, and that was in a game against Detroit where they won by 3 scores. Granted, it was a close game, a closer game than the score indicated, but their offense has looked really good. Their defense has slowed down, but it was really good, and they still are an extremely opportunistic defense. You see that with the 4 turnovers that they forced against Gardner Minshew, and everyone kind of talks about how, if Jalen Hurts there, they don't make those turnovers. Well, it's like, 2 of them were running back fumbles, and then 2 of them were fantastic plays on the ball for interceptions. It's not like it was that was a horrible pass by Minshew. Deron Bland wrestled that ball away from, I believe it was it Devonta Smith, AJ Brown? He wrestled it away from whoever the receiver was, Quez Watkins. But the Cowboys team this year seems a little bit different to me. And again, everyone's been saying that for a while. But Marcus, do you think that they can win the Super Bowl?
I thought the Cowboys could win the Super Bowl from the offseason, really. I mean, I think that's just kind of the expectation that you have to have when you're the Dallas Cowboys. That's the pressure that was kind of placed on Mike McCarthy's shoulders by Jerry Jones indirectly when he mentioned that there are options at the coaching position. Jerry Jones recognizes that Sean Payton isn't gone forever. And Jerry Jones recognizes that if Sean Payton were to come back, one of the places that he could come is to Dallas. Mike McCarthy, I'll give Mike McCarthy credit. Mike McCarthy has done above average coaching. He's done an above average coaching job this season. I'm not going to say he's done an exceptional job. I'm not going to say he's great. I'm not going to say he's in the coach of the year conversation because the Dallas Cowboys still lack discipline. He still can't manage the clock. But listen, and maybe I get hate for this. Maybe I don't. I've gotten to a point where with this take, I don't care if you hate me or not. It's just the truth, right? Any team that has a top 5 defense and a top 10 quarterback and a top 15 receiver is usually a Super Bowl contender. And the Cowboys have that. The Cowboys have had this season a top 5 receiver. CeeDee Lamb is a top 15 receiver, and I think he's answered the question of can he be a number 1 receiver this season? He's been exceptional this season. He's had a career year this season. Dak Prescott, I understand he's missed 5 games this season. He now leads the league in interceptions with 14. But let's not forget, about half of those interceptions are not on him, right? One of those picks he threw in that game against Tennessee the other day, tight end had it in his hands, just couldn't hold on to it for whatever reason, right? Excuse me, right? That pick against Noah Brown against Jacksonville last week that ultimately sealed the deal for them in overtime. Noah Brown, that ball hit his hands, and he admitted himself, that ball hit your hands, you got to catch it. That ball hit his hands, he couldn't catch it. It pops into the hands of the defender, goes the other way. And we've seen that time and time again with Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys this season. The Cowboys can win the Super Bowl. I think you look at this football team. Here's the thing. The first time they played the Eagles, there was no Dak. The second time they played the Eagles, there was no Jalen Hurts. So for all I'm concerned, and by the way, they split those games. Now, granted, the team that didn't have the backup quarterback won the game, which kind of makes sense. You know, your team has your starting quarterback in the game. But I still think if Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts play both those games, I think the Cowboys win both those games against Philadelphia this season because they're the better team. They are the better team, right? I think as much slack as I give to Mike McCarthy about his terrible coaching, let's get one thing clear: he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback or head coach, and he has the experience of a head coach that you need in playoff situations. Nick Sirianni does not, right? Dak Prescott, despite having only won one of his 4 playoff games in his career, Dak Prescott has experience in the playoffs, a lot of it. Jalen Hurts has played 1 playoff game in his career. Right, I can go on and on and on and on. This Eagles team is a feel-good story, right? You have the guy who won over the locker room at the end of last season, rallied off all these great wins. The Eagles cannot stop the run. I don't care what you tell me. The Eagles have struggled with stopping the run all season, and we've seen if you pay close attention to what the Eagles and the teams that the Eagles have played this year, when the Eagles hold a team to under 100 yards rushing, give or take 10 yards, it's a blowout. Any other game, when they don't hold a team under 100 yards rushing, it's a close game or a loss, like they did it, like against Cowboys, like against the Commanders, right? That game against I can't think of the team. That game against the Lions earlier in the season was a close game. Now, granted, they held the team to under 100 yards, I believe, but that offense was also playing really good that first week of the season for the Tories. Like this is a team that is susceptible to the run in Philly, and I think the Cowboys could beat the Eagles in the playoffs. Let's also not forget that the division is still on the line, right? So if you're asking me, can they win the Super Bowl? I'm looking at this from the perspective of, well, can they win the Super Bowl as a wild card or can they win the Super Bowl as a division winner? I think they can do both. If the Cowboys are having to go on the road as a wild card team, I'd like their chances less because they're going to have to go. Likely, they're going to have to go to Tampa Bay. They're going to have to go to San Francisco or Minnesota, and then to Philly for the NFC Championship game. But if the Cowboys can win this division, which it's still in play, because if the Cowboys win this week and the Eagles lose, like it's still possible. They're only one game behind, like despite what people want to make you believe. This is the Eagles have not locked up this division yet. They have a playoff spot. They haven't locked up this division yet. This division is still up for grabs. They win this week, they win the division. They win the number 1 seed in the NFC. I say all that to say, if the Cowboys can win this division, I think that 100%. Oddly enough, I think that makes their chances worse. Because the Cowboys, they just play with two. They play two. It's like us, dude. Like when we're the 1 seed, when the Packers are the 1 seed, they're played too stiff. When the Cowboys are at home in the playoffs, they play too stiff. I think the Cowboys should want to be the wild card team. I think the Cowboys should want to be doubted. I think the Cowboys should want to go on the road to Tampa Bay because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I don't care that it's Tom Brady. The Bucs have not been good this season. I think the Cowboys should want to play Minnesota because they stomped Minnesota earlier this season, the last time they played them. I think the Cowboys should want Philly because that's a perfect matchup. I think the only team in the NFC, the Cowboys, that stand in the Cowboys' way of winning the Super Bowl this year is the San Francisco 49ers, and that is because that's just who the 49ers are. Hell of a defense, hell of an offense, one of the best O-lines in football, one of the best pass rushing defense. I go on and on and on and on. Of course, you got Kyle Shanahan out there calling the shots. I definitely think if we are talking about I'll be honest with you, there's only 6 teams in the NFL that I think have a shot at winning the Super Bowl this year. It's Buffalo, it's Kansas City, it's Cincinnati, it's Philly, San Francisco, and Dallas. Dallas is in that good discussion. I understand the record doesn't show it, but the Cowboys are better than the Vikings. The Cowboys, I think you can make an argument that the Cowboys have a legitimate shot to beat the Eagles. And I think the only team that would give them a lot of trouble is the San Francisco 49ers, right? And so to answer your question, yes, the Cowboys can win the Super Bowl. Now, the Cowboys also find a way to get in their own way when the pressure gets highest and when the lights are at their brightest. And that's my one concern. But I know it's against our religion as Packers fans to kind of give all the Cowboys all this praise because we're not supposed to. But the Cowboys have a top 10 quarterback. They've got a top 15 receiver. They have a top 5 defense and a decent head coach. Those 4 things are what you need to be considered a Super Bowl contender. The Cowboys have all 4 of those things. They are a Super Bowl contender this year.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you on that one. I think, especially on your Eagles point, we'll talk about who the favorite is in the NFC. But right now, I like Dallas over Philly. I truly do, and for a lot of different reasons. One, Jalen Hurts has not been super fantastic when he's played Dallas with Dak Prescott. Obviously, you take a look at that last game, and everyone wanted to talk about when Gardner Minshew was in. Oh, they got 4 turnovers, and they whatever. They only beat us by 6. Well, you got 3 turnovers and only beat the Cowboys by 9 when they had their backup quarterback playing. So it's not exactly, even. Jalen Hurts, I'm trying to look up his record here. I believe he's played against Dak Prescott. I think it's 3 times, and I think he's 0-3. It might only be 2 times, but he hasn't played super well. He's thrown pick sixes to Trayvon Diggs, I think in both games last year, if I'm not mistaken. He threw interceptions and pick sixes to Trayvon Diggs. Yeah, they lost by 20 last year. Again, obviously, it's not the exact same team as it was last year, but I think that it does prove a point. They also lost by 20 the year before in that. And then I think, he played and again, he lost by 20, not to Dak Prescott in 2020. In 2020, he lost to Andy Dalton by 20. He threw 1 touchdown and 2 picks. So we have no idea what Jalen Hurts is going to look like come playoff time. We have no idea. But with the Cowboys, Dak Prescott hasn't played a horrible playoff game. I truly don't think he has. You look at that game again, one of his best games he played against Green Bay in 2016, his rookie year. And the Packers it was one of the better Packers teams we've seen over the past 10 years. That was the run the table year. That was a team who got hot and Aaron Rodgers could not be stopped.
Yeah.
And Dak Prescott and the Cowboys took them down to the last second. They were tied at 28-all, 31-all, and it took one of Rodgers' all-time throws up the sideline to Jared Cook to beat those Cowboys. Then you move on to 2018. They beat the Seahawks. They beat the Seahawks, who had a number one rushing defense, or the number one rushing offense in the league. And it wasn't even really close. Yeah, the final score was. That game wasn't super close. The Cowboys dominated that game. It never felt like the Seahawks had a chance. If I'm not mistaken, the Seahawks actually in that game, I believe that the Seahawks scored like a close to last second touchdown to like make the score look closer than it was, to cover the spread. But they weren't doing a whole lot. The Seahawks leading rusher was Rashad Penny for 29 yards. Chris Carson had 13 carries for 20 yards. They shut down that offense. And Dak Prescott, he didn't play super fantastic, but he played well. He had the biggest run of the game. He, dodged Bobby Wagner, dove for the first down on what I think was 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, somewhere around there. He played very well. Then the next week against the Rams, he played well as well. People think that just because you lose and you play for the Cowboys that you didn't play well and that you choked. It's just not true. Their defense gave up over 273 yards rushing. C.J. Anderson was going for 5.3 yards a carry on him on 23 carries. Todd Gurley, back when he was still a thing, was getting around 7 yards per carry on 16 carries. back when he was in the league, man. Dak Prescott played well throughout that entire game. Their defense couldn't get a stop at the end. And even if you look at that San Francisco game, everyone, we're playing revisionist history here. What were we talking about the second that game was over? Were we talking about, oh, Dak played horribly? No. Yep. We were talking about the stupid call by McCarthy to call a quarterback draw with 13 seconds left. That's what we were talking about. Yep. And granted, that plays against the Cowboys too, because they didn't get rid of Mike McCarthy, so they still have him. But yes, this Cowboys team can go up with anyone in the NFC. I think they can probably go up with anyone in the AFC, to be super honest with you. Do I think that they'll win? Maybe not, but I think they can keep it a close game because that's what they've done all season long.
Dude, not to cut you off, and I know it's against our religion as Packers fans to do this. There are only 2 teams in football that I think the Cowboys can't beat: San Francisco and Kansas City. When the Dallas Cowboys are at their best, mind you, and look, if you don't like numbers, too bad, because I love them. Let me just give you some numbers, okay? No one in football has more fourth quarter pressures than Micah Parsons. No one in football has a higher fourth quarter pressure percentage, obviously, than Micah Parsons. If I'm not mistaken, other than Nick Bosa and TJ Watt, no one else has more fourth quarter sacks than Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons, and this defense as a whole, but Micah Parsons specifically, when it matters the most in crunch time in the fourth quarter, this is the same defense, by the way, that went off 33 unanswered in the fourth quarter against Indianapolis Colts. Now, I get it, it's the Indianapolis Colts, but still, 33 straight points in a game that heading into that point was 19-19. It was tied. 19-19, they rattled off 33 straight. They ended up winning the game 54-19. Colts didn't see it coming. There are a lot of defenses in football that rely on turnovers, which is another reason why I'm not 100% sold on the Eagles, because they're one of those teams, right? The Eagles defense relies on turnovers to be effective, right? The Cowboys defense does not rely on turnovers to be effective. They have a playmaker at every single position. They've got a playmaker. They got a playmaker up front. They got a playmaker at the second level in the linebacker core. They have a playmaker in the secondary. That's what you need to be successful. Dak Prescott at his best is a top 10 quarterback. At his worst, he's top 16. He is above the Kirk Cousins line in the NFL of like kind of how you measure quarterbacks. And I think at this point, maybe that line is going to become the Derek Carr line, depending on how things go with Derek Carr the rest of the season. But Dak Prescott's top 10, undeniable. Argue with the wall, I don't care. The Dallas Cowboys the Dallas Cowboys with a backup quarterback, and I get it, at the time they weren't what they are now. With the backup quarterback, the Dallas Cowboys beat the Cincinnati Bengals in week 2 with a backup quarterback. You mean to tell me that if Dak's playing in that game, they can't beat the Bengals? And you, Emmitt, you know how I feel about Joseph Lee Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. I love me some Bengals, but they can beat them. I think, calling a hot take, I think the Cowboys could go to Buffalo, or it would be going to Buffalo, but I think the Cowboys could handle their own against the Buffalo Bills. We've seen them We've seen them beat the Vikings. We know they can beat any other team that's in the NFC playoff picture except for the 49ers. They can beat any team that's in the AFC playoff picture right now except for the Chiefs. I think they could beat the Chargers. They could beat the Dolphins. They could beat the Patriots. They could beat the Jets. They could beat the Jaguars. Like, they can beat these teams. Look. I know it's easy to give the Cowboys, the football team, and Cowboys fans a hard time because it's been a little over a quarter of a century since they won a championship. It's been that same time since they've even been to a conference championship. They've been a joke for a large part of this, going 8-8, seemed like every other year for a stretch of time for the last decade. But let's forget the past and focus on the now. This Dallas Cowboys team in 2022 and 2023 in a couple of hours, this Dallas Cowboys team this season, despite Dak having thrown for 14 picks this season, despite missing 5 games, despite the fact that Ezekiel Elliott coming into the season had a big question mark on whether or not he could be the future of this team and remain on this team, despite the fact that there's been a huge step back as far as this O-line is concerned, despite the fact that they don't have Amari Cooper, despite the fact that they were missing Michael Gallup for some time, despite the fact that you can sit there and say that maybe Trayvon Diggs overrated, despite the fact that they have Mike McCarthy in charge of the clock, despite the fact that Kellen Moore forgets sometimes how to run this offense, this is a football team this season that has the pieces to win a Super Bowl this year. The only 2 teams that stand in their way are San Francisco and Buffalo. And if your team's not in San Francisco, if your team's not in Buffalo, I cannot sit here and say for certain I would pick your team over the Cowboys. Is there an argument to be made for the Bengals, the Bills, the Chargers, the Dolphins, or the Vikings, or the Eagles, or even the Commanders, even the Packers? Of course, there's always an argument. But definitively, there are only 2 teams definitively that I look at today and I say, these 2 teams, if these 2 teams match up with the Cowboys tomorrow, they're going to win. More than likely, it's the 49ers, it's the Chiefs. The Chiefs, why? Because of Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid. The 49ers, why? Because that's just who they are. Like, the 49ers have just, they have just been the NFL's spoiler. No matter what you have going on for your franchise, you step foot on the field with the 49ers, chances are you're going to lose because that's how well they've been constructed. I just want to, it's so easy to crap on the Cowboys, but this Cowboys team this season, in this 2022-23 season, has a legitimate shot of making it to and winning the Super Bowl, and I don't think people are giving it as much credit and as much logistic thought as it deserves because it's the Dallas Cowboys and because of what they've gone through over the last 26, 27 years. That's all.